Imagine coaching a team that does not technically exist yet. Imagine winning the most prestigious trophy in professional hockey before your city even knows what a power play is. Imagine being 33 years old, handed the keys to a franchise that just abandoned its country, its fan base, and everything it had ever known, and then being told to go win. Not build, not develop. Win. Right now. This season. That is the story of Marc Crawford and the Colorado Avalanche, and if you have never heard it told the right way, that ends today. There is a version of this story that the NHL would love you to believe. A neat little fairy tale about a franchise that relocated, found its footing, and eventually built something special. That version takes years. It involves patience and front office vision, and gradual roster construction, and all the language that leagues use when they want to make something look inevitable in hindsight. The real version is none of that. The real version is a 33-year-old head coach who had never run an NHL bench before, walking into a locker room full of players who did not ask to be moved, in a city that had never seen this level of hockey, and producing one of the most stunning single-season turnarounds in the history of North American professional sports. No grace period, no rebuilding year. One shot and he buried it. If you are new here, this channel exists for one reason: to tell you the stories about hockey that nobody else is bothering to tell. The scandals that got buried, the franchises that collapsed in slow motion while the league looked the other way, the moments that changed the sport forever and never got the coverage they deserved. If that sounds like something you want more of, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what we put out next. Now let us get into it. Marc Crawford was born on February 13, 1961 in Belleville, Ontario. His father, Floyd Crawford, was a professional hockey player, so the sport was never something Marc had to discover. It was already there, already in the house, already part of the air he breathed growing up. He played as a forward. He was not a star. He was selected by the Vancouver Canucks in the 4th round of the 1980 NHL draft, 70th overall, which in the language of hockey scouting is polite for promising but not elite. He spent 6 seasons bouncing between the NHL and the American Hockey League, never establishing himself as a true big league player, never becoming the kind of guy whose name gets called in highlight packages. He was a working hockey player, the kind the sport is built on, but not the kind who gets remembered for what he did on the ice. He hung up his skates in 1989 and walked directly into coaching with 0 experience, 0 name recognition, and 0 reputation to coast on. His first head coaching job was in the Ontario Hockey League with the Cornwall Royals, the same junior program he had played for as a teenager. It was as low a starting point as you can find in professional hockey development while still technically being paid to coach. 2 seasons there, results that were solid but not spectacular, and then a move up to the American Hockey League with the St. John's Maple Leafs. What happened next told you everything you needed to know about who Marc Crawford actually was underneath the resume. In his very first AHL season, he took the St. John's Maple Leafs to the Calder Cup Finals in 1992. The next season, he won the award for Best Coach in the entire American Hockey League. In less than 3 years of coaching at the professional level, he had already reached the top of 2 separate leagues. That is not luck. That is someone who figured something out fast and then kept figuring it out. The NHL came calling in 1994. The Quebec Nordiques, a franchise with a long history of struggle and heartbreak and exactly 0 Stanley Cup championships, handed Crawford his first big league job at 33 years old. The timing was strange from the jump because the 1994 to 1995 season was already in crisis before it started. A labor dispute between the league and the Players Association wiped out most of the schedule and compressed what was left into a shortened 48-game sprint. Everything was compressed, everything was urgent, and there was no room to ease into anything. Crawford took that environment and thrived in it. The Nordiques finished first in the Northeast Division with 30 wins in 48 games. By any reasonable measure, it was one of the most efficient coaching performances in recent NHL memory. At the end of the season, the league recognized it. Crawford won the Jack Adams Award as the best head coach in the NHL. He was not just the youngest recipient in the history of the award. He was the first rookie head coach who had ever won it. Ever. In the history of the trophy. The Nordiques lost in the first round of the playoffs to the defending champion New York Rangers, and that stung. But everyone understood that a full season was coming, and that this team was going to be dangerous with time to develop. Except there was no full season coming. Not in Quebec. The story of what killed the Nordiques in their home city is the kind of story that gets told in boardrooms and political science classes more than in hockey conversations. But it matters here because it is the foundation of everything Crawford was about to inherit. Nordique's owner Marcel Aubu needed public funding from the provincial government of Quebec to finance a new arena. The team needed a modern building to stay financially competitive in the NHL landscape of the mid-90s. Premier Jacques Parizeau said no. The provincial government refused the funding request, and that was effectively the end. Without the arena, without the public money, without the political support, Aubu could not make the numbers work. In May of 1995, the Quebec Nordiques were sold for $103 million to the Comsat Entertainment Group, a company based in Denver, Colorado, that also owned the NBA's Denver Nuggets. The franchise was moved to Colorado and renamed the Colorado Avalanche. Marc Crawford, who had just been voted the best coach in professional hockey, woke up that summer as the head coach of a franchise that had never played a single game. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you have been following this story for years, and you know exactly what it felt like to watch this happen in real time, drop a comment below right now. Copy and paste this. I watched this happen, and the league never answered for it. You are not alone in feeling that way. A lot of people watched the same thing and walked away with the same questions. Your comment might be the thing that makes someone else feel like they are not crazy for caring this much. So drop it below, and let us keep going. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Denver, Colorado in the fall of 1995 was not a hockey market in any meaningful sense. The city had professional basketball and professional baseball and a football team that was building towards something real. It did not have a hockey culture. It did not have a generation of fans who grew up watching the game. The Avalanche were not inheriting a passionate local fan base the way a relocated franchise sometimes does. They were dropping professional hockey at the highest level into a city that was genuinely starting from zero in terms of fandom, expectation, and understanding of the sport. And the man responsible for making that work was 33 years old and coaching in the league for the first time. The 1995 to 1996 season started with the Avalanche looking like a very good hockey team. Crawford had inherited genuine talent from the Nordiques roster. Joe Sakic was already one of the best players in the world, a complete two-way forward with the kind of quiet consistency that makes coaches look brilliant because he never forces them to manage a problem. Peter Forsberg was 21 years old and playing like someone who had been sent from the future specifically to embarrass defenders. The roster had real pieces, but what the team did not have, heading into December, was a goaltender capable of carrying them to a championship. That changed in a moment that still gets talked about in NHL circles as one of the most chaotic and consequential trades in the history of the sport. On December 2, 1995, the Montreal Canadiens were playing the Detroit Red Wings. Montreal goaltender Patrick Roy, already a two-time Stanley Cup champion and arguably the best goalie who had ever played the game at that point, was having a catastrophic night. Detroit was scoring almost at will. By the time Roy was pulled from the crease, the Red Wings had put 9 goals past him. The final score was 11-1. What made the moment historic was not the score. It was what happened after Roy was pulled. He walked over to the Canadiens bench and told team president Ronald Corey directly, in plain language that was impossible to misread, that he had just played his last game in a Montreal uniform. Canadiens head coach Mario Tremblay had left Roy in the net through that destruction in a decision that many at the time read as either negligence or a deliberate message to a goaltender Tremblay had a complicated relationship with. Roy was done. He made that known in public, at the building, in front of everyone. Within days, the trade was done. Patrick Roy was a Colorado Avalanche. What Crawford had now was something that does not happen in professional sports very often. He had an elite goaltender who arrived with a point to prove. Roy had been humiliated in public, not just by the loss, but by the manner of it, by being left out there while the scoreboard became a cruel joke. He did not go to Colorado to rebuild his confidence or ease back into form. He went to Colorado to win the Stanley Cup and make it impossible for anyone to talk about December 1995 without also talking about June 1996. That kind of motivation is not something a coach can manufacture. Crawford did not need to manufacture it. He just needed to not waste it. The Avalanche finished the regular season with 47 wins, 25 losses, and 10 ties. That is a dominant record by any standard, and it represented Crawford's ability to take a franchise that had just been uprooted from everything familiar and make it not just functional, but elite within a single year. The playoffs began, and the Avalanche worked through the bracket with the kind of controlled aggression that good teams produce when they know they are good. They dispatched the Vancouver Canucks. They beat the Chicago Blackhawks. They came through against the Detroit Red Wings, which, given the history Roy had just lived through, carried its own particular satisfaction. Then they reached the Stanley Cup Finals against the Florida Panthers, a team that had made an improbable run of their own, and Colorado swept them in 4 straight games. Patrick Roy won the Conn Smythe Trophy. Joe Sakic lifted the Stanley Cup. Marc Crawford, 35 years old, stood behind the bench of a franchise that had not existed a year before, in a city that had never seen this, and he had just coached his team to a championship in the first year of their existence. It was the first Stanley Cup championship in Colorado Avalanche history, which is a sentence that also means it was the first time any professional sports team in the city of Denver had ever won a title in any major league. That fact alone should stop you for a second. The first major professional sports championship in the history of a major American city, and it came from a hockey team that had been playing there for less than 12 months, coached by a man who had less than 2 seasons of NHL head coaching experience. Crawford went on to lead the Avalanche to division titles in each of his 4 seasons with the franchise. They were not just good in 1996. They were consistently dominant, a real contender every time the calendar turned to spring. After an early playoff exit in 1998, Crawford stepped down on May 27th of that year. He was 37 years old. What Marc Crawford did in Colorado between 1995 and 1998 does not fit neatly into the usual language we use to describe coaching success in professional hockey. When we talk about great coaches, we talk about systems, about culture building, about the slow, patient construction of a winning organization. Crawford compressed all of that into a single season. He did not get the luxury of building a culture from scratch. He inherited a displaced roster in an unfamiliar city, with a skeptical new fan base, and a roster that had just survived one of the more disorienting situations a professional sports team can go through: a full relocation mid-roster, mid-career, mid-everything. And he did not just hold that together. He turned it into the best team in the world. There is something specific about the way Crawford navigated the Patrick Roy acquisition that tells you the most about who he was as a coach. Roy did not arrive as a patient asset to be developed into a system. He arrived as a force of nature with an agenda and an edge, and an enormous ego that had just been wounded in front of the entire sport. Managing that requires a particular kind of intelligence, an ability to give a player the respect and space their talent demands, while also keeping the whole thing pointed in one direction. Crawford did exactly that. He gave Roy a team worth fighting for, and Roy gave Crawford a championship. That exchange does not happen by accident. The legacy of the 1995 to 1996 Colorado Avalanche often gets framed as a story about Patrick Roy or Joe Sakic or Peter Forsberg, the names that show up on highlight reels and Hall of Fame plaques. And those players earned every bit of that recognition. But behind all of it, running the bench through one of the most unconventional first seasons any franchise has ever had, was a 33-year-old coach from Belleville, Ontario, who had spent 6 seasons as a journeyman forward and decided that if he could not be the best player in the building, he was going to be the best coach in the sport. He nearly got there. For one extraordinary year in Denver, in a city that was still learning what icing meant, he absolutely did. That is the story. That is what actually happened, what it cost, and why it still matters today. If this is the kind of content you want to see more of, subscribe to Cold Hard Hockey. We are just getting started and there are stories coming that are going to make this one look like a warm-up. Hit the bell so you know the moment we drop something new. Thank you for watching and we will see you in the next one.